Hello, Internet. Gino, that was Reno Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. And today it is time for us to get on the road, time to get trucking, because it is time to drive down Kentucky Route Zero. This is a game that's been on my short list to play for, it feels like 5 years. I don't know if it's actually been 5 years, but I've always wanted to experience this game, and it's something that I've wanted to experience when all of the episodes were out. And Episode 5, if it is not out now, it will be out shortly. And so we are finally getting in touch with this game. And so I am joined on this journey down Kentucky Route Zero by Banjo Pete Busbee.
Hey, what's going on? Big fan of the banjo. Actually very difficult to play. A lot of guitarists think they can just make the jump. Not so easy. It's got an extra string.
And you got to pluck.
True. Have I ever told you guys, I feel like I haven't, but I just want to make sure, about the time Pepsi became the 6th largest military in the world?
No, you did not.
Oh, okay, excellent. So Pepsi was making a deal in the late 1980s with Russia, but Russia couldn't just buy Pepsi, right, because, various Cold War machinations. So the last time they made a deal for it in vodka. But this time, they wanted so much Pepsi, $3 billion worth, that they couldn't pay for it in vodka. It would have cost too much. So instead, they traded Pepsi, here's the list, 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. So at that moment, when Pepsi accepted these ships from the Russians in exchange for $3 billion worth of Pepsi, they became the 6th largest military in the world. And then eventually they sold it to a Swedish company who just recycled it for scrap. So they didn't stay a military power for very long. But briefly, Pepsi had its own navy.
That they should have used it to ship Pepsi across the world. They really should have just gone the Demolition Man future.
I mean, really anything besides just selling it for scrap. I mean, they could have brought the military-industrial complex to literal life in that moment.
Yeah, they didn't need to hire a PMC. They could have become the PMC. Pepsi, Frito-Lay, Blackwater.
Yep.
Well, that other voice you've heard in the background is Harmonica Palladino.
Oh, man, I wish I had a harmonica that I could just... That's a harmonica noise. Hello, everyone.
Organ.
Yes. I do not have anything to report this week. This game was good. I do have an animal fact for Pete. I found this in our suggestion box.
Okay.
This was suggested by ZP. Do you know of the Cantor's giant soft-shell turtle?
I have not, but I can't wait to look it up.
It is a large flat boy. It grows to 2 meters long, and it spends 95% of its life buried and motionless, surfacing only twice a day to breathe.
This guy's the best. I love him. This is my new favorite animal.
ZP suggested that in November, so better late than never.
Oh, man. I'm glad I'm upset that I didn't know about this for all that months, but I'm glad I know it now.
It's Cantor's giant soft-shell turtle?
Yes. What a little flat boy. He's the best.
Oh, wow. Look at him.
Look at that little dude.
Oh, man.
Why is he like this?
I don't know. There was no explanation given.
Look at his little pig nose.
Wrought.
His little pig nose.
This is when you realize evolution isn't aiming at anything. Like, it has a purpose. It's just shots in the dark.
Hey, the Platypus Awards exist for a reason.
I'm telling you. What a great animal.
Sometimes things survive. It's not really about winning anything. It's about survival.
Just about lasting.
The water bear will outlive all of us, and it's not going to invent anything. There's no water bear poetry. It's not going to figure out anything cool to do scientifically.
How dare you? I believe the water bear will one day form beautiful poetry.
It's going to outlast all of us. It's the only creature we know of that survives in a vacuum.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Do we have anything on the Discord report?
Let's see. Let's look around.
Well, ZP's been freaking out continuously about the Sacramento Kings. He's just been having regular breakdowns about the NBA.
I think Luke Walton might just be a bad coach.
I think he might be. It turns out it might not be representative of a coach's skill when their one successful run involved the most talented NBA team ever assembled.
No.
I thought we should have learned this from Phil Jackson and his coaching stints, not coaching Michael Jordan.
Time out. You guys hear about this? Kobe Bryant?
There's breaking news. I wasn't sure how I should bring this up, but you brought it up.
I just looked in the Discord and CP posted it.
Breaking news from the Discord report.
Yeah, literally.
Holy shit!
10 minutes ago. Yeah, oof, that's crazy.
In a helicopter crash.
Helicopter crash. Kobe Bryant died. That's insane.
Holy shit, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Not to be a downer.
I know. This is a live podcast. Fuck. Basketball Minute. Let's...
Mm-hmm.
I have complicated feelings about Kobe Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyone who's sort of like uncritically a fan of Kobe, I think is a problem, honestly.
But he seemed to have been trying to do better in his post-NBA career. Oscar winner, Kobe Bryant, just literally, I think yesterday, he was courtside watching LeBron James outdo his scoring record. LeBron passed him last night playing against your 76ers, Pete.
You.
And he was courtside. They were doing interviews about it, about passing the torch. And it's definitely a dark day for basketball fans everywhere. He's one of the players who popularized the game internationally. There's an entire generation of players who modeled their games after him, and multiple time champion. One of the greatest Italian-speaking players ever.
Yeah, I mean, these are all fair points. I never liked Kobe for various reasons. And I don't mean to disparage a man who just died, but I do think it's worth asking where in his obituaries Colorado will come up, if at all.
Yeah.
Somehow that's been almost completely buried in any conversation about Kobe, and I think it's strange.
Super duper.
Yeah.
Like, the Colorado history is not great.
No.
It kind of, I think it dwarfs a lot of his playing career.
Oh, 100%.
Personally.
Absolutely.
So it'll be interesting to see, but I know that basketball is worse for him not being in it.
Yes. And I mean, the man has a family and everything, obviously, too. It's a sad day regardless.
Yeah. So, live Discord report, sad Discord report. Let's transition. We got emails. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to be on the Discord report, you can support us, patreon.com/deeplistens, and then you can be in the Discord, talk to us, the hosts. I might want to save this email because it's a funny email. I don't know if the transition is right.
Let's get some levity in here.
Yeah, we need to move on at some point.
Now, unrelated to what we were just talking about in every way, here comes an email from ZP. It starts, "Hail Satan."
Okay, good start.
All right, I like the opener.
I send this email to recognize that the Deep Listens podcast has successfully survived the shit show that was the year of our Lord 2019. And though this request is a bit belated, I thought I would be apt to request each of you make predictions about what will happen in 2020. Here's what I want each of you to do. Predict one thing you think will occur during the podcast, one gaming-related thing outside of the podcast, and one non-gaming related prediction. However, to get you into the spirit of things, I thought I would share the incredibly bold predictions from Jemima Packington, an Aspromancer. For those unaware,
sure,
she's a psychic who shakes a can full of asparagus and tosses the asparagus into the air. Then, based on the shape the veggies take when they land on the ground, she divines predictions. For reference, here were her 2019 predictions. Fears over Brexit will prove mostly unfounded. The trade war between China and the U.S. will end, but there will be a recession in the U.S. that will affect the world. Exciting new technology will be launched. Fucking that one's a layup. England's women's football team will win the World Cup in France. TV's Big Brother will return to our screens. Extremes of temperature will become the norm. U.S. romantic musical A Star is Born will win an Oscar. Household British businesses will fold. England's cricketers and rugby teams will enjoy success. And asparagus will see an all-time high in sales. Now that one's just wanting to raise your own.
Playing to our market.
Yep.
Were those predictions founded?
Like the layups were, and then everything that was out on a limb was wrong.
Yes, pretty much.
Like A Star is Born will win an Oscar. Absolutely. Like they will have a best song. Clearly. I would say that exciting new technology will be launched. The world will be warmer. Extreme temperatures will be the norm. Like, those are layups. Mm-hmm. Everything more specific than that, they were very wrong.
She gets it. I mean, this is how it works.
You shoot your shot.
Yeah.
And if you want to know, here are her predictions for 2020. Donald Trump will win a second term as president before being impeached. Already impeached again? Okay, sure. More countries will take action to fight global warming, probably. Storms and typhoons, hurricanes, and flooding will increase tenfold. Tenfold is a lot.
Tenfold? Wow,
Jesus.
okay.
With more floods affecting the UK. The floods, yes.
I mean, it's an island.
Tenfold is too much. Sports and sporting personalities will be involved in scandals. No shit. Brexit will go ahead smoothly without causing expected problems. However, major UK political parties will see a shake-up sooner than predicted. Independents and small retailers will enjoy a resurgence. The youngest person ever to win an Oscar will be hailed acting icon of the future. Trouble in the royal family will see members relinquished of official duties. This will be followed by more royal deaths and births.
I mean,
sure.
I guess that one counts, depending on when the prediction was made.
Yeah. And I feel like predicting royal deaths at this point, you could just...
Yeah, start the clock.
Yeah. A renowned showbiz personality will announce his unexpected retirement. The BBC license fee will be abolished or reduced. I don't know what that even fucking means. A massive review of UK education will see standards improved from nursery to university. Interest in veganism will plateau. The veil of Eversham asparagus will be heralded as the most prized vegetable worldwide. There are pictures.
Is it of the asparagus?
I am not clicking on this link. P.S. Marvin Bagley having feet made of glass is killing me slowly. I seriously had more fun watching the 17-win Kings season than this season. Okay, so first a podcast prediction from each of us, then an outside of the podcast prediction, and then one gaming-related outside the podcast prediction, and then one non-gaming-related prediction.
Okay.
Who wants to go first? Don't all at once now.
Well, I only have a podcast prediction yet. I think I could do the other two if you want to go out of order.
Sure. That's fine by me.
So my gaming prediction, I think games are going to be increasingly hyper-targeted based on Kickstarter. So you're going to get games that are even more tied to like niche, 30 people are going to love this sort of deals.
I would have made that prediction like 3 or 4 years ago.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm super behind. It's going to happen even more.
Yeah, okay.
I think you're
into it.
Winner.
Nice. Okay, my other prediction, my outside gaming prediction, I think you're going to see a resurgence of unionization starting with the gig economy. I think people are going to see how it's working there, and it's going to expand to more and more industries from there, hopefully.
To that one, I say good luck.
Thank you.
I hope that works out.
Yep. I'm going to be optimistic.
Em, how about you?
In gaming, I think this is going to be the year that someone finally has enough of being exploited by big companies, and we're going to see some moves towards unionization.
Nice.
Yeah.
All union predictions.
Yes. What else? What were the other ones? It was
one outside gaming and one
outside gaming
in the podcast. One podcast prediction. feel like we control the podcast,
Yeah.
and so it makes it hard to predict. Like I could just make it happen, but
Yeah. Oh, I'm
Speaking
gonna
of existence.
I'm gonna actually. I have one for the podcast. This is gonna be the year we play Final Fantasy 14 because I'm gonna make you play it. 'Cause it's time.
I think that's a good prediction.
Yeah. And
How many are left?
Of the main, so we've played 1, 2. We're playing 5 now. We've played 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. So we still need to play, and 12. So we still need to play 3, 4, 6, 11, 13, 2, 13, 3,
There's so many.
14, and 15 of the main
Jesus.
lines.
That's so many Final Fantasies.
But we played 10 and 10-2. We're more than halfway there. We're getting there. And thankfully they've stopped making them. So
for now,
we'll catch up. So I'm going to say, oh, and what's your non-gaming prediction, Em?
death will occur in
the
general.
world?
In world. Yes.
In world.
That's bold. Some people have to predict these things. Okay. So I think one podcast-related thing, I think that this year we'll try a genre of game that we haven't tried on the podcast before. Maybe it'll be a fighting game. Maybe it'll be like a first-person shooter. We haven't really played many of those.
No, we haven't in a while.
Like it might be a genre of game that we have not played before, or we have very sporadically.
Okay.
Maybe it's a rhythm game. Who knows?
Okay.
Let's play a hentai game.
Nope. Nope.
I think you did do that before.
We've done
actually.
that, and we
Can't
did
wait
not
to
record a
see the
podcast
story.
for it because it was a
lot
nightmare.
of subtext.
I think another prediction, gaming outside of the podcast. I think this might be the last E3.
Really?
I think this year might be the last E3 because at this point, the only major company who still has an E3 press conference, I think, is Microsoft. Nintendo has opted out. Sony has opted out. And a couple of the major publishers still do it. But I think at this point, it's becoming more and more of a skeleton crew at E3, and the expense is just going to outweigh the value. So I think this is the last year for E3.
Do you think it's just going to be a really bad year, and then they're not going to be able to make it for next year? Or
I just think it's useless. It's a waste of money to rent out this large convention hall and fill it with a bunch of small publishers. All of the major publishers have their own PR departments at this point. They all have their own conventions even, and they could make the money themselves. They can cut out the press or just send out press releases. So then why bother doing this large event?
That's fair. Like Double Fine was doing a thing across the street that was getting more people.
Yeah. Like Sony, Square, Nintendo. Nintendo just does direct streams at this point. They don't even bother with going to the press at all.
Yeah.
Sony is doing that increasingly as well. So I think that if Microsoft opts out, what reason does the press even have to go to E3? And now it's like a weird PAX press combo, like where they're selling passes to normal people. And if it's just going to... That might be the thing that saves it, is that it's just making back its cost by allowing regular people in, and it just becomes a convention the same way like Gen Con's a convention. But I think E3 as a thing that needs to be covered because news will happen there and big announcements will happen there, I think is going to be going the way of the dinosaur. And in the world, what prediction? If only I had asparagus.
Yeah, right. Clearly the asparagus is very specific.
If only I had some sort of odd future divining device. It's amazing that the asparagus would tell you about Brexit and the TV show Big Brother.
Yeah, right.
But hey, it's
the wisdom of plants,
I'm gonna say,
It's
All of my
hard,
predictions
right?
would be sad. I think most of the
Well,
predictions that are most likely to come true
things
would
are
be
shitty,
sad.
you know?
Mm.
That's just how things are right now.
Yeah, it's been a shitty couple of years.
Yeah.
You know, I think that at some point Mike Bloomberg is going to take his money. When he loses the nomination very soundly, he will spend his money in some ludicrous way, either like paying off Florida voting debts so that people can vote, or like running a ludicrously large advertising campaign. I'm not going to say that any of this will be successful, but it'll be big and showy and New York-y.
Mm.
Okay.
I think that's what's going to happen when he loses.
All right.
Okay, so there's our email. Again, if you want to get in touch with the show, at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got comment sections and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And so, it's time now for my obsession of the week. It's time once again. And I think for my obsession this week, I've got two different shows, one of which I'm pretty sure everyone is, well, three shows. Many, I think people are hip to them at this point. Schitt's Creek, it's a comedy.
Yeah.
It's excellent. I'm catching up on it.
Mm-hmm.
Fleabag
Yeah.
on
I
Amazon
haven't
Prime.
started that one yet. I really
It's
should.
excellent.
Yeah.
Very funny. Very touching in spots. Recommend that wholeheartedly. And I just started watching Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts.
Ooh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that show is also very good on Netflix. It's got a banging soundtrack. I believe the musical director is the person who did Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So it's got some of that sound to it. The music's really good. It's a very fun, upbeat show
It's a good
about the
premise.
post-apocalypse.
Yeah. I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's 20-minute episodes, 10, 20-minute episodes, so it's very low investment. But seeing this mutated future LA is pretty cool. Or is it LA? It's mutated future California.
Okay.
It's rad if rad was good. So there we go. So without further ado, it's time to discuss Kentucky Route Zero. Does someone want to try and explain what this game is?
I mean, it was your pick, Gino.
Sure, I can do it. So Kentucky Route Zero is an adventure game that takes place in Kentucky, where a driver, a delivery man named, I think, Calloway, that's his last name, is driving a shipment of antiques to an antique store that is on Dogwood Drive. And when he tries to find this place where he's supposed to make his delivery, a gas station employee who he asks about said location says, "Oh, to get to that place, you need to take Route Zero." And he's like, "What? That's not a road." But actually, you just kind of go with it. And you are trying to drive to find this elusive Route Zero to make this delivery of antiques. And along the way, you encounter a bunch of surreal and otherworldly experiences and this kind of magical realist interpretation of kind of a road story. About right?
I think that generally sounds accurate.
So, starting off, we start off at Equus Oils, which is this very unique location. It's a gas station with the giant head of a horse kind of poking out of the ground with an office kind of in the horse's head. What was your first impression of this game? Because, Pete, you came in completely blind, right?
Yeah, I know nothing about it, really, beyond just, the 2 chapters I've played so far.
So what was your first impression? Because I've played it. I played Chapter 1 before. Em, did you ever touch this game before? You know about it, but did not play it, right?
I was told about it, and I've been meaning to check it out, but I've never actually dived into it. So I knew sort of the feel it was going for, but I didn't know, what I was getting into when we first started. It seemed like a normal point and click adventure. Everything is done with the mouse, and then really quickly, like, you go into the basement of the what is it, like
Gas station, Equus
gas
Oils.
station? Yeah. And you're in the dark, and then there are people who are sitting in the dark who are clearly playing like a D&D game. And then you have to find their die that went missing. You go and find it because it glows in the dark, and then when you go back, they're not there. And then when you ask the guy who's in charge of the gas station, he's like, "Oh, you're probably just hallucinating." And so that kicked it off in a weird direction.
It was a good opening. One of the first things that struck me, two things really. One is Callaway moves in a sort of very distinct way.
Yes.
That only gets sort of more distinct as things happen later on in the game. But something about the way Callaway moves combined with the sort of skeletal scrawniness of his dog indicates something about the sort of life this person has led and the sort of way this game is going to unfold. So in terms of sort of atmosphere at the very beginning, just Callaway's movements suggest a weariness or a run-downness that his dog and the Equus Oil gas station really sort of perpetuate further.
Yeah, this game is kind of just struggling to get through the day, a lot of it. And the way that you actually can set the text to different speeds. If you look in the menus, there's sudden. I think the second one is steady, and then the last one is drowsy. Those are the three settings for how quickly the text moves. And this is a game that's very clearly kind of deliberate in its pace for both storytelling reasons and I think just for pacing purposes. Because the chapters are not very long, but they really want you to kind of ruminate. Like there are a lot of, every time you want to leave someplace or do something, the game will usually give you a prompt saying, does Callaway do this, or does he decide to linger longer? And it's pretty different. Like when you try to leave an environment, it always gives you a choice, leave or don't. Usually a game will say like leave, yes, no. But in this game, it always tries to make the act of staying an authored experience. Like this is the character being deliberate, or something is causing this character to want to stay in this place, and that's why he's staying. It's not an arbitrary choice of the player's will.
Mm-hmm. I think too, in terms of sort of this slow pacing, this sort of deliberateness. I mean, the decision to structure the game, like there aren't levels here. What there are acts and there are scenes. So you have Act 1, Scene 1, then you have Act 1, Scene 2. So the idea of sort of structuring this at a place suggests sort of like a timeless humanism. Like you're not necessarily playing for achievements or completion. What you're doing is you're accompanying an actual person through a play, basically, which is really a vision of their life in this discrete moment.
Yeah, and the game actually just keeps adding acts or scenes to the chapters as you explore. So if you keep doubling back to places, it will keep adding on scenes, even though there might not be anything to do in the place that you've returned to, which I found really interesting. I actually, in the first chapter, I had 10 scenes by the end of it, but I think you could probably get through it in like 4.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if I realized that it did that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I noticed because at one point I left Equus Oils and decided instead of because one of the first things that you do is ask about the zeros. Ask about the zero, how do I get there? And you get directions to this farmhouse, which the Marquez farmhouse, the directions in this game are great. Anytime you get directions to go drive someplace, because the directions for the Marquez farmhouse is, just go up the 65 to the tree that's always on fire, and then make a left.
I mean, a very distinct landmark, though. I mean, like, you'd find it.
Oh, yeah, but a lot of the directions in this game are centered around these broken down places or places that are actively distressed. Like, here's a tree that's always on fire. No one puts it out. It's just a blight on the side of the road that hey, it's a good landmark. Or like, just take a right at the artificial limb factory, and then you'll get to where you're trying to go. And so after I got the directions to the Marquez farmhouse, I actually just kind of drove around the road for a while, just finding different places and exploring. And then I decided to go back to the gas station, and there was an additional person at the gas station that I hadn't met before. And the first time I played this game, I had never met them. So there's actually a lot of interesting stuff you can just happen across if you drive around enough and look around. Did you stumble upon any... Well, one thing just on Equus oils before we leave. Did you notice what the shape of Equus... that the horse shape actually continues below ground?
Huh. Does
Whoa, like the horse has legs?
Yeah.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, the horse... The head pokes up above ground. You go down a set of stairs, and that's its neck. And then if you keep walking to the left or right... The pipes that run to the, I assume, like the gas drums below ground, are the hooves. And then there's a tail in the back, too. So it's fully just a buried horse.
Sounds about right.
Which, the idea of having this buried animal in the middle of Kentucky, in the middle of the old frontier, that now is just belching up oil and rooted to the ground... I think it's a very nice visual metaphor for this kind of closing frontier that this game encompasses.
Yeah. I mean, Kentucky is famous for its horses as well. The theory is the limestone in the soil makes their bones strong.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that.
Supposedly.
Did you also notice that whenever you talk to things, like the word, if anyone mentions the zero... There's animation over the word zero.
Is it like that shaky, like
that
kind
shaky,
of staticky? Yeah, that comes up later. I think when you're watching the TV, it's for like recordings or anything that's odd.
Yeah, it's an interesting little effect. This game is visually, I think, very stunning. Not just kind of the different locations that they set up, but also how they use font and text to kind of provide meaning. What did you name your dog also before we...
I named mine Blue.
Blue just seemed like the more appropriate name for a dog in a game like this. I don't know, maybe I'm being dismissive, but that's what I ran with.
Yeah, I also went Blue. So we're Team Blue. Well, Blue sometimes she has clues, so it's just appropriate. So, did y'all find any of the kind of weirder stuff on the side of the road before before or after the Marquez Farm?
I found a guy who was playing the banjo, and you can just sit there and listen to him for a while. And then Conway tries to give him $1, and then he like puts it in his whiskey, and then the guy gives it back.
Yep.
I found two guys pushing a plane.
Yep.
That was weird.
Two guys barefoot pushing a plane down the highway.
Yeah. And then they just go off screen, and you are given no explanation. There is nothing to click on. You cannot move in the scene. You can just leave. It's very weird because it also has that like creaking of the gears as the plane is like being pushed. What else was there? I don't know if I saw anything else before I went to the farm.
I saw a Baptist church that is empty, but you can basically break in. And as you keep walking in, You can check out all these different rooms, and there's music just kind of slowly playing of parishioners singing. And the closer you get to the parishioners, the louder the music becomes. And then when you finally get to the room where the singing is coming from, it's just a tape recorder playing hymns on loop. And the church seems to be abandoned, like completely abandoned. But there's the sound of gospel music coming out of it. And that's another one where this game...
That's super creepy.
Yeah, this game is a lot about facades.
Mm.
Just the image or representation of some normalcy or some higher purpose, in this case a church. But once you get inside, there's the people or the beliefs or the function that used to give this building purpose is no longer there, and instead a facsimile has been put in its place. And you can choose to turn off the music or leave it on, and I chose to leave it and then leave that church. I also found a abandoned office building.
Yeah, I found that one.
That you can break into. Well, again, like nothing's locked on the side of this road. Everything seems to be abandoned and worn out. So, and what did you find in the abandoned office building?
So you go into this abandoned office building and you like creep through, and everything seems to be destroyed. And then there's a hallway that you go into, and at the very end you see some light coming out from under the door. And then you open that doorway and there's just a group of people in there. And they're like, oh, we were waiting for you. And then you just go in there and you chill with them. And I think that's it. You just like hang out, and then that's the end of the scene.
Yeah, I think they're basically homeless people living in this abandoned office building, burning old office supplies for heat.
Yeah.
Yeah, this game has a lot of really striking imagery, and these last two scenes we described are all told entirely via text and sound.
Mm-hmm.
There's no location that you're walking around in, but it's just some excellent, excellent adventure game writing.
I mean, this connects to the history of the interstate highway system as well. Like, once we started having huge interstates and freeways and things, it sort of signaled the death of a lot of these sort of small towns because nobody needed to pass through them anymore. So it's sort of, it's a look, the sort of meandering around is a look at places that people just don't really go anymore. And I mean, the differential building of these highways, like when they built the highway interstate system, they didn't run them through the nice parts of town. Like a lot of it was racially motivated, but they put them through, the quote unquote shitty parts of town.
Yeah, it's a really interesting critique running throughout this game, and I think the critique gets more explicit when we get to the Marquez Farm. So when you get to the farm, looks fairly abandoned, and in this section of the game, there's just some incredible lighting when you go from the highway up to the farm, because it's basically every element of the setting that you're not directly in at the time is kind of shrouded in shadow. So when you're on the highway, you only see a silhouette of a farmhouse. As you get closer to the farmhouse, you can't see the highway anymore. And then once you get up on the farmhouse, you can actually see inside of it. But until you're in one of these places, it's all just silhouetted, which is visually pretty stunning. There's a set of graves right outside the farmhouse with three last names on them. And when you get inside the farmhouse, you find Weaver Marquez, who has a very odd way of speaking. She says that her family lived in this house. They bought this house, but eventually they stopped paying the banks, and then their house got foreclosed on, which is another running theme throughout this game, is people getting into debt and then not being able to pay it. But Weaver says that you should look for her cousin, Shannon, and that they were the same age. She says, we are the same age. Well, we used to be. She's older now. which is a pretty interesting statement.
Yeah, I mean that's going to catch anybody's eye who's like, oh, 6 cents sort of deal here, maybe.
Yeah, you put a TV down because Weaver asked you to, and you look at it for a second, and when you stop looking at the TV, she's gone, and the car that was there is also gone. So I think it's pretty early on, kind of raising the question: is Weaver a ghost? Was she there and then she left? Like, how did y'all interpret that?
I just assumed, that Weaver was dead. I mean, that's the first thing I jump to when somebody's like, oh, I'm not older, but she is now.
Yeah, that's where I jumped.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And there's like M mentioned early on with the people playing dice or playing D&D, these places all seem to be haunted in a way, but they are domestic spaces or manufacturing spaces. They're not necessarily the places that you would expect to be haunted. But one thing I actually also noticed at Equus Oils is when you're down there, there's a sign that says, caution, don't be down in the basement for more than a few minutes at a time because of the fumes. So it's another place where people are expected, like it's the storage for this gas station, but it's actively dangerous to the people who work there. And so all of these spaces that you occupy and that you explore are actively killing the people in them, it seems like.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a whole theory of slow violence, or like the risk society and how it's differentially applied. So like certain risks are offloaded to certain communities as opposed to others for, political and economic reasons.
Yeah, totally. And I think that that's kind of one of the running themes of this game is and we'll keep going, but slow violence is definitely going to keep coming up.
I think just sticking with sort of my larger point about the highway system and the ghosts and things. Like this, you genuinely get the feeling that like this is an area that's been forgotten or left behind. But then like whenever like you say something's forgotten, the question is always, all right, but by whom? Like Callaway hasn't forgotten this. This is where Callaway lives. So like to say that it's forgotten or left behind, you necessarily have to make the next question, all right, who's forgotten it?
Yeah, and it seems like the people that Callaway meets have not necessarily forgotten these places, but opportunity and financial success have. And so there's a bunch of people just kind of living in the ruins of this once prosperous place, trying to make do. Like the people that you find living inside of an abandoned office building. And I actually at this point doubled back to Equus Oils and met a man who was carrying antlers and was trying to put on a play. He was trying to – I didn't get the guy's name, but he was trying to put on a poetic interpretation of Robert Frost's The Death of the Hired Man. And he said to keep an eye out. He asked Callaway to keep his eye out for a location with good psychoacoustics.
Psychoacoustics?
Yeah. He said his other big, like he was a big fan of poetry and acting, but he also was a fan of like it was like cryptozoology or some other weird shit like that.
Okay.
So he needed a place that was big and grand that would let him put on this performance with good psychoacoustics.
Mm-hmm.
So
he really specifically wanted it to be outdoors for some reason. And did you mention he's carrying around like a deer skull? Yeah. It's just an odd character. It's very David Lynch, like the lady with the log.
Right.
Yeah, but the choice of what play to put on, I thought was pretty important. So The Death of the Hired Man by Robert Frost is a poem about a hired man basically coming back to a farmhouse where a husband and a wife live. And every season they've been, baling hay and putting things out to market. And this old man, Cy, comes back. He had helped them seasons in the past, but now he's too old to really help do field work of any kind. He's broken down and is still trying to get a job working for them when he clearly is physically incapable. And the longer these two discuss it, the husband doesn't want to pay for this guy anymore. He doesn't think he's up to the task. He thinks the guy should try to retire or move on. The wife's like, you can't, dash this guy's spirit. He's trying to make do. He's trying to actually make something of himself in the world. And by the end of it, it becomes clear that this man is not necessarily there to work anymore. He's there to die on this farm, kind of doing what he did. And the poem ends with them just stumbling upon him already dead.
Yeah, it's a very, it's a one-word eulogy, too. It's just dead is the only thing the man says. But there's also, like, a really big emphasis on, like, craftsmanship. Like, Silas was very, very adamant about the way he did his job, like, very particular about how the hay was bundled and labeled and everything. And the guy's basically saying, like, yeah, he did that well, but, like, it doesn't really matter because he can't keep pace anymore. I mean, it fits with Calloway's, like, Calloway's an antiques delivery man, which is, like, isn't really a job that needs doing necessarily in a modern context, but he's very obsessed with doing it properly and diligently. Like, he's looking all over for this Route Zero.
Mm. Yeah, trying to deliver it to this street that apparently no one's ever heard of.
Yeah. He does make a point of saying this is, like, the last time he's going to be doing this. We think because they're, like, going out of business. So it's literally, like, an antique of an antique. So he's just doing it for, like, sentimental reasons. Do we go into, like, Lizette and her husband and that sort of story?
Well, I think that comes up a little bit when you first get to Equus Oils. You go on a computer at one point, and I think you can read some emails that Calloway got from Lizette and from his job. And then when you go to Shannon's place of employment, she's Weaver's cousin, and she lives, like, she has a TV repair. Is it even a shop? Like a room?
Yeah, it's in the back of the bait shop, right?
It's in the back of a bait shop. It's a TV repair shop in the back of a bait shop. And when you're in the bait shop, you can put your hands in the different bait tanks. And in one of the bait... Did you do that?
No,
I don't think I even found this space.
Oh, okay. So
when was this?
When you go to Shannon to meet Shannon, or try to find Shannon, you can try and find her. You go to the bait shop, and there's a sign that says Shannon's Repairs in the back. And if you ask the clerk, he'll tell you, oh, she's gone. But there's also 3 bait tanks in the corner, and you can have Calloway dunk his hand in the bait tanks. And each time he'll, like, put it in, like, one of them's, like, worms, one's night crawlers, and one's, I think, minnows. But they just describe them by how they look. So one's like a writhing mass of pink, one's dark goo, and one of them is flickers of silver. And the deeper in you plunge your hand into these bait tanks, like Calloway will describe more vivid sensations and memories. And then in the last tank, if you put your hand in, he blacks out, and you get a flashback to him and Lizette.
I had to go back and find that.
Yeah, when he blacks out, it's because one of the, like, beer signs or something fell into the water, and you get electrocuted.
Jesus.
I mean, sure. Whatever.
Yeah, so, Em, if you want to describe Lizette and the husband.
So, you only get, like, vague, contextual, like, hints of who they are. It seems like they were the owners of the the antique shop that Conway is doing deliveries for, and it's implied that Lizette's husband was Conway's friend, and then something happened to him. He's not around anymore. I think he died, and Lizette is like basically going out of business because it's a antique shop and nobody needs it in this age. So this is like Blue, the dog, is actually their dog, and she's just rolling with you for some reason. I think you're taking care of it because they can't anymore. And it's like he's trying to do a good job because he owes them something. We don't exactly know what that connection is. It seems like he's a friend, but we don't I don't think we are given any hint of like what their connection is at this point in the story anyway.
Yeah, we know that there's a deeper history there between Conway and Lizette, but we don't necessarily know, is it a romantic relationship, is it a deep friendship, is something wrong? And depending on what dialogue choices you take at different times, it seems like you can change the relationship that Conway had with Lizette. Like, you can make choices that make it seem like he was not so good at his job, or he was very diligent at his job.
We also...
or things are better or worse than they are.
Yeah.
And the game seems to adapt depending on the things that you say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They also had a son, and it sounds like he died at some point in the precursor to this story. And that's sort of the tragedy that they're dealing with as they are also losing their business. So there's a lot of components to this story that we're only getting glimpses of.
Yeah. After this point, I think I went back to the gas station again, and you can find a museum that has warm walls that are really weird. And if you find that museum and then go back to the gas station attendant, he says, "Hey, I actually have something in the archives of that museum if you want to go back." And when you go back there, the museum's actually a museum of it's got a game archive in it. So like there's a bunch of indie games in there, and the gas station attendant, I guess, was a game developer.
Oh, great.
Yep. He made a strong career move and decided to get out of the game racket and get into gas station attending.
A hopeful message for all the game designers out there.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. But I thought that was a really interesting thing, just having this old broken... It's another museum, but completely disused. No one's in there. And the museum has a game wing. It's also got like birds' feathers and wings in one section. It's this really eclectic combination of displays, like everything in this game. And just kind of speaking to what you were saying earlier about the antique store not doing so well, one of the lines that Conway says is, it's just one recession after another. Everyone's selling their old stuff cheap, but no one's really buying.
Damn.
I mean, there's even something quaint sounding about like a television repair shop. Like, TVs aren't outdated technology, but it seems like for whatever reason, the idea of repairing it is.
Yeah.
Because it's just been cheaper to buy new ones.
Mm-hmm. And even when you're talking to Weaver, she says that Shannon was a TV repair person, but she's been having trouble with newer models, probably because, it's a completely different technology at this point.
Yeah, they're not necessarily even repairable.
No,
Right.
like, if you think about Apple products, like the second you open it,
Mm-hmm.
it's void. Like, you're not even allowed to repair it.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot of things about a way of life dying in this game. And from here, you go to the Elkhorn Mines, which are spooky.
Yeah.
Super spooky.
And when you get there, you find Shannon. So you can go try to find her at the bait store. She won't be there. At the Elkhorn Mines, she says that Weaver came and visited her as well and told her to go to the mines. So you run into each other there. And you start by trying to, like, get a sense of how deep and how dark the mines are using...
Like sonar, I guess? I don't really understand the science of it, obviously.
They say, like, it'll resonate with your emotional resonance and stuff. It's a bunch of pseudoscience stuff. But by the end of it, Conway collapses and messes up his leg, and it's unclear how. You start at the top of the mine, and then after you wake up, you're at the bottom of the mine, and your leg's messed up.
Didn't rubble fall on him or something?
It seemed like
it's
some
unclear
sort
how.
yeah, there was some sort of crushing injury, but
Yeah.
Like, 1 second you're standing by a microphone, and then the next second you're in a completely different location with your leg pinned. So it's unclear how that happened. But you're at the bottom of the mines, and you're in a mine car. And as you go, you can turn the light on or off. And the mines have a system where there's electrical rationing. So if electricity is being used in one place, it cannot be used someplace else. And it's mentioned that Shannon says, let me see something on this. The miners used to have to pay to run the fans and the lights. So you couldn't have both on at the same time.
Yeah. They were paid with Scrit. So they can't even use the money for outside of the company. It's just being paid with a token instead of actual money.
Yeah, so when you get to the bottom, Shannon tells you so at one point there was a gigantic accident in these mines. A bunch of people died because they bore into an underground lake, and the water filled one of the chambers, and they couldn't escape, so they drowned. And Shannon said that the trapped miners couldn't get the pumps going because the power was rationed, so they shut all the lights off, but even that wasn't enough. So I guess it was dark when they drowned.
yeah, it's not fun. It's all bad news.
Which is really unsettling stuff, but did you try turning off the lights when you were in the minecart?
Mm-hmm.
It's super spooky.
Yep.
So what happens when you turn off the lights?
Ghosts and music.
Yeah, you can see silhouettes of the miners, working, basically.
Mm-hmm. And there's this really creepy, like, archival music that plays. There were, like, Shannon tells you this story of, like, archivists who were in the mines and they recorded the miners' songs for some reason. And
They're
then
studying miner songs.
Yeah. And then you can find their, like, tape recorder and it'll play the creepy music. It's very unsettling.
Yeah, and at first they were just studying folk music among miners, and then it was all volunteer, but then the company that ran the mines got word of it and thought there might be some profit in it, so they started paying the miners Scrit to participate.
Huh.
And they tried to commodify the archival process.
Jesus, I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, I think that depending on what questions you ask, you might get a slightly different picture of how that went. But you can find a stage where the miners were recording songs, and then you can find an old recording that will only play when the lights are out.
Yeah.
And that's fucking creepy.
Sure is.
Yeah. The whole mine is, and like it should be. Like, this should be terrible and off-putting and distressing as suitable for its history.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of paying these miners for their music, like, this is their cultural capital, basically. Or it doesn't have to be capital. It's it's the one thing that they have that is their own culture that they have created to get them through the toil that is working in these mines, and even that is up for purchase. But not even up for purchase that will advance their lives. Like, the things they are purchasing, it turns out Shannon's parents were miners that worked in these mines, and her parents each had their own vice for how they spent their Scrit. Her dad ran the fans to try and make the air more breathable, and her mom bought canaries to tell when the air was no good for breathing. So they basically spent their Scrit trying not to die in these mines. And she says, my parents were like that. They saved up money until the company store found a way to get them. And that was what kind of put them into debt. Just horrifying stuff all the way.
Fucked up.
And when you try to leave the mines, you kind of get a choice between whether you're going to follow Shannon or Conway. Which did y'all pick?
I followed Conway, who basically just sits there because his legs hurt.
Yeah, I stuck with Conway the first time around, but I was sort of curious what happens if you follow Shannon. So I did.
Yeah, me too.
I did investigate, and you basically go down and you find the helmets of the drowned miners. Like, they're still there. Because, I mean, who's going to clean them up, I guess.
Yeah, I did not. I stayed with Conway, so Conway just kind of reminisces and has some thoughts by himself. You can also find the Zero, kind of on one side of the mine, and you also find broken railroad tracks as well down there. So once you actually get out of the mine, you can find some notes on the songs, and it turns out Weaver's parents were the people who were studying the miners. So Shannon's parents were miners. Weaver's parents were archivists, basically. And when you're reading the notes, Shannon says that Weaver's folks were like that, careless with tragic ideas. That they were kind of going down there talking to these people who were poor and desperate, trying to learn things about their culture just to take them back because they were academically interested in these songs, not necessarily in the people who sang them. But turns out Weaver also ends up in debt. She went into debt for tuition for college.
Yeah, there's a very ambivalent sort of attitude towards, like, a higher learning, not necessarily, but sort of like the academic infrastructure, like the institution of academia, that, like, granted, like, Weaver's parents had a certain power in virtue of it, but Weaver and her pursuit of it ended up in the same or even a worse situation as everybody else.
Yeah, Shannon in some ways is better off repairing TVs and working out of a bait shop than Weaver, who tried to get a degree in mathematics. Because at the end of the day, taking on debt is seemingly both inevitable and inescapable once you've done it. Like, the company or the system gets its claws into you, and then it will strangle you to death, is how this game kind of depicts it.
Which
and
is...
It never lets these ideas go.
Yeah, and this is, like, the idea of sort of, like, debt as slavery is actually a rising one in certain evangelical circles. Because, like, the Bible makes certain... I mean, the Bible doesn't make certain assertions about modern debt, but the Bible says things that are taken as condemnations of modern debt. So there's this idea that, like, if you want financial independence, you need to give up debt in any possible form, which, I mean, is reasonable, but in a certain sense counterproductive in some instances. But this is all just to say that, like, it has a wide purchase in certain evangelical prosperity gospel circles.
Yeah, and I think this game also just has a lot of opinions on kind of late capitalism in general, that these, in order to expand markets and to create more value for the parent companies, these faceless companies that we hear about through these different characters, the companies are basically just trapping their employees and the people around them in debt. They're raising this society off the highway to the ground for seemingly no reason. It's just kind of leaving destruction in its wake everywhere. We don't see any corporation or company in this game that seems to be making the world a better place.
But that's the other thing too. Like, I agree with your assessment completely, Gino, but we don't really even see the corporations themselves. Like, these systems, these people are so far beyond or outside the communities we're looking at that, like, they're just almost like an unspoken presence. Like, they're the environment, they're the climate. Like, there's no way to actually address them personally.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think the magical realism plays well here, because the ghosts of the miners and the ghosts of the characters at the gas station, those ghosts are real. We can see them, we can interact with them, and then they vanish. They're this ethereal being that is there and then blinks away. And yet the corporations and the different financial institutions, in a way, are just as much of a magical power on this world as anything else. We don't see them, but we hear about them and we feel their effects.
Mm-hmm. It's worth, too, making a point, like, at this point about magical realism. So, like, as a term, certain people have problems with it, because to say magical realism proposes a certain epistemology. So, like, if you say, oh, this story has ghosts, so it's magical realism, you're necessarily making a claim that, oh, no one should believe in ghosts. So, like, here, to say the game's magical realist, it's probably less problematic considering some of the elements that happen, but I think it is proposing a different epistemology, where it's like, okay, the existence of these corporations that live so far outside people's lives, that could just as easily be the magical realist element. So, like, it's creating a secondary epistemology where the magic isn't necessarily the ghosts. The magic is that you can trap all these people in debt from corporations, millions of miles away, potentially.
Trap them in debt, kill them, and then abandon the place where they died and have no consequences come unto you.
Yeah, that's the incredulous part, not that the ghosts are still in the mine.
Yes, and I think that that's an interesting kind of inversion of expectations here. In many ways, making corporeal the costs of these systems and making stark and vivid what's happening to this society is much more impactful than, or it's much more meaningful to me than some of the more literal descriptions I've read of how these systems work. So this is kind of the end of Chapter 1. You go back to the Marquez farmhouse. You fix one of the TVs, because Shannon's with you now. You can also go back to Equus Oils, and Shannon will have some things to say to Joseph, the gas station attendant. But once you fix the TV, it tunes in, and it turns out that the old farmhouse behind the Marquez house is the entrance to the Zero. It just kind of vanishes, and then you end up just driving through it and into the Zero. Which, creepy. Super creepy.
Sure is weird.
Yeah, pretty much all this stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
So, Pete, you did not meet the guy who was trying to put on a poetry show.
No, I did not meet Antler Man.
You did not see Antler Man at the beginning of Chapter 2 either, correct?
I don't think so. What is he doing at the beginning of Chapter 2?
So at the beginning of Chapter 2, he talks to Lula, the attendant, the clerk that you end up talking to, and he's asking about, like, putting on a show and if she can help him.
No, actually, okay, I think that actually does happen.
Okay. And you can also talk to him I think when you go back to the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces, which is the place you start at in Chapter 2, which, what a great name.
Yeah.
And he'll ask you, like, hey, did you find any place that would be good for me to put on my show? And I told him you should go to Elkhorn Mines.
Oh, I told him the gas station.
Did he like that one?
Yeah, he seemed to be into it. What do you think of the mines?
He liked it. He liked the mines. He said it's grim.
Mm.
The psychoacoustics there should be very strong.
It's certainly fucking grim. Like, if there's one thing the mine is.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, so the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces is subterranean. It turns out the Zero's underground. It's a highway that goes underground, and it does not seem to obey the laws of space or time. And when you're down there, the history of the Bureau is also very interesting. There are TVs everywhere, and they're mostly off. But it's kind of this building, and Shannon and Conway have a conversation at the beginning that's just like, do you think we're inside the building or outside the building? Because it's unclear where the building begins and the walls of this subterranean structure end. And you're basically trying to find Dogwood Drive, so you talk to the clerk, she tells you, hey, go up. You talk to the receptionist, who then sends you to the clerks. So you have to take an elevator to get up there. But did you try any other floors other than the clerk floor?
Yeah.
The first floor?
I liked the third floor, which is bears.
Yes.
It's just, you go up there and there's a whole bunch of bears, and they turn and look at you. You wander through, there's nothing to interact with. That's the whole thing.
I like how they look at you too, like you're the weirdo. Like,
yeah, right?
Oh, you're not a bear. What are you doing here?
The same thing happens if you go to the conference room and all the people just look at you like, what the fuck are you doing here? You just wander through like a RPG character and bump into walls, and then there's nothing to interact with, so you leave.
Oh, did you not find the thing to interact with on the receptionist floor?
I guess not. What was it?
If you walk to the far right on the receptionist floor, there's a pipe organ, because the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces used to be a cathedral, but it was bought out from the parishioners, so now it's this office complex of undeterminable use. And if you look at the pipe organ, there's a man in swim trunks cooking on a barbecue, sitting at the stool for the pipe organ. And if you watch him long enough, he will then turn and start to play. And when he starts to play, the lights go out everywhere, and it's just kind of lit by the screens of the TVs and the different clerks' computer screens. And there's just this ambient organ music that plays for as long as you're in that area until you leave.
That's fucking wild. What the fuck? I gotta go back and find that.
Yeah, it's really cool. And did you find the crabs, too?
Crabs? No.
So after the dude started playing the pipe organ, when I went downstairs on the lobby floor, there were a bunch of hermit crabs walking around. And each of the hermit crabs had a shell made out of office supplies. Like one was a hermit crab in an inkjet cartridge. One had a pile of paper clips, and one was a manila folder.
Huh. I definitely would have noticed those.
Yeah, this space really blends the natural and the artificial in cool ways. Like, the higher up you get, the more the stalactites and stalagmites, which one comes from the ceiling?
I have no idea. I feel like this is something I should know, but
I think stalagmites are on the floor, stalactites are from the ceiling. Can we get a ruling? It's one of our nature fact people.
I agree with that. Let's see. I'll look it up.
With it.
But the higher you get in the floors, the more you see those dangling down from the ceiling. And there are these living animals just kind of walking around the lobby. You can see these gigantic fans just jutting out from the roof of this cave that you're in. It's a very interesting location.
I mean, this fits with the sort of late capitalist message we're talking about, right? Like, we're in the Anthropocene now. There is no real difference between the natural and the man-made at this point. They're all sort of, I don't know, they're together.
Yeah, third floor, bears.
Yeah.
And not only that, but this bureau is itself a reclaimed space. It used to be a church.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been repurposed already at least once. So it was a cave, and then it was a church, and now it's a office complex that doesn't seem to do anything. But they didn't even remove the organ, like the church organ, or some of the light fixtures that seem to also be from the church. It's a really cool place. And when you talk to the clerk, Lula, who's going to help you, she sends you up to the filing department. When you go up there, they don't have files. They don't have all their files. They have files, I think, A through like F.
Yeah.
And so anything that has to do with a topic that begins with a different letter, they haven't brought yet. So something has to do with pollution. Sorry, no files on anything that might have to do with pollution because we haven't gotten to P yet. And so they basically say, hey, we don't have the files on Dogwood Drive. You need to go to this the church that we repurposed. If you go where that church is, they had a bunch of files. We stored it with them. So what did you think of the church that we find?
Just another like super creepy space. Like there's just one, I guess he's the custodian or the factotum or something, who's just
The janitor.
The janitor, yeah, who's playing recorded sermons to an empty church because everybody else is gone.
And the church is in a storage facility.
Yeah, it's called Random Access Self-Storage.
Yep.
It's just a bunch of storage lockers, basically. And originally, the church tried to keep going on out of this storage locker, but eventually some of the parishioners left. And once they started leaving, it started a downward spiral. And then the priest himself just gave up. And the janitor just kept coming. He took recordings of these sermons, and now he just routinely plays them. But he's not a Catholic.
Mm.
He just does it out of a sense that he should.
Yeah, he doesn't even like, if you ask him why, he doesn't really even have like a rationale for it. Like you ask him, it's like, oh, is this a hobby? And he's like, well, like a hobby doesn't really seem right. It seems more intense than a hobby, but it's not a job. Like even he's sort of sketchy about his motivations.
Yeah. And did you listen to the sermon?
I went back and forth between listening and talking to the janitor. What was the sermon about? Did you take a note on that? Because it seems relevant.
It was about how we are called by Christ to identify with the worker.
Mm-hmm.
And how, like the second
section.
Yeah, the second section of the sermon talks about how 4 martyrs were killed in a protest in Chicago, and that they were martyred for the cause to help laborers, basically. They talk about unions. It's a very socialist / communist, depending on... you only hear a little bit, so you can't really discern how far left this parishioner was. Mm-hmm. But that's what it's about. It's about labor rights.
Was that Martyrs in Chicago thing relevant to like a actual real world?
I didn't get a date, so it was hard to place if it was supposed to be set in a specific place and time. But this game is very deliberately set in Kentucky. I think the section of the highway might even exist. Not necessarily all the roads and the things near the road, but I think the 65 is an actual highway that runs through Kentucky. So it's hard to know sometimes in this game, when anything is happening, because it's so magical realist. But yeah, I assume that it was referencing something specific.
Is it the Haymarket affair? It's... I just looked it up. There's a bombing at a labor demonstration in May 4th, 1886 at Haymarket Square in Chicago. It was a peaceful rally in support of workers striking for an 8-hour workday. The day after police killed 1 and injured several workers. An unknown person threw a dynamite bomb at the police as they acted to disperse the meeting, and the bomb blast and ensuing gunfire resulted in the deaths of 7 police officers and at least 4 civilians.
That would be a wild time, though, because that's the 1800s, you said?
Yeah, 1886.
So having recordings of that would be extra odd.
But
They even have recordings back then?
No, I don't think so.
But the root zero doesn't conform to, like, space
or time.
So time.
That's a good point.
Huh. That's wild.
Yeah. This game goes all over the place.
Yeah.
After you get the files, Conway passes out again. And your leg is doing really badly. It's extra bad in this chapter. And you're basically told, hey, let's go to a doctor. Let's get your leg looked at. And so you get a card for someone who's topside, a doctor who can look at you. So you have to leave the zero. Did y'all go back to Equus Oils or any of the other places?
No,
I think I forgot.
The doctor.
Yeah. Like, Conway moves really slow, so it's hard to walk anywhere because his leg is injured, which makes sense. I did spend a lot of time on the zero, which is this really weird, like, line art. Like, you can go around in a circle, and then depending on where you stop and turn around, it determines where you can end up. Did you guys find the pamphlets for the what was it called? It was like the secret tourism department.
No.
No, it's just hard about.
Oh, inside the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces on the lobby level, you can find a book that has pamphlets for a bunch of different hidden spaces that when you go on the zero, you can track them down by following the directions in the pamphlets. So there's 5 of them. I can't remember exactly what happened because they're all weird. You find a valley and a cave, and it's odd. The whole thing is very surreal. I recommend taking a look because that was an interesting space to explore while I was just looking around.
Yeah, I didn't spend much time on the zero.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't explore as much. And when I got topside the first time, in chapter 1, I really explored every side road. I went every single road, tried to find everything, and I did it in between story beats because the road actually fleshes out as the chapter 1 goes on. In this section, I pretty much stayed main line. So I'll need to go back and check that stuff out too. But once you get topside, you need to go to... You're trying to find this doctor's office, but the development that the doctor lived in has been razed and replaced with a museum. And it is called the Museum of Dwellings.
Mm-hmm.
So the museum has been knocked down, and there's this gigantic museum, huge, that is full of homes, but different kinds of homes. And when you're inside of the museum, for much of it, Conway and Shannon aren't the people talking. Most of the voiceover and dialogue is from the people who live in the museum and kind of told as though they're being interviewed by the corporation that owns the museum, asking about Conway and Shannon.
Yeah. They're narrating what you're currently doing, though.
Yes. They are narrating what you're currently doing from ostensibly the future. Being interviewed by an unseen interviewer, and you're actually playing as the interviewer. So all of your dialogue choices are kind of you interrogating these different people. But each of the dwellings is really interesting. Which one stood out to y'all?
I like the houseboat that was not on water.
Yeah, she was asking if they could rock it for her.
Yeah. There's a tent. There's a trailer. What else?
There's an overpass, a highway overpass, and
Right.
there's a homeless guy living under it.
With the tent too, wasn't somebody like begging to get into the tent? They were like, "Hey, if you need anybody to live here, like I'll totally do it."
Mm.
Yeah, I know someone who would live in the tent. So the people who are living in this museum are basically being paid to be living mannequins, making the displays, like living in the displays as a person would live in these different types of dwelling.
It's sort of like colonial Williamsburg, but like much more exploitative and unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
And sinister, yeah. Yeah, it's like if you went into the Museum of Natural History, but instead of fake, I don't know, like fake cavemen, it's actual people.
Just
who have
You know what
seemed
it
to have
is? It's like in like the old World's Fairs where they used to get like basically tribal people from other countries and put them on display.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Sort of like that.
Ugh.
It is exactly that, and they are trying to find people who live in these different kind of dwellings. So they found a homeless guy and put him under a highway overpass. And there's a banjo in a glass case under the highway overpass. Like there's homeless person accoutrement that's under glass, so he can't even use it. And when you get to that guy, he talks about how they need to finish the roof of the museum because it's getting wet. And his section is just like it was raining that day, and so his section was flooding all the time. Which is just they have recreated perfectly the shitty conditions of living underneath a highway overpass.
Yeah, who's to say like that was an accident? Like maybe that was verisimilitude.
Yeah, and that's how I took it. So you keep going through. You can find a farmhouse. You can find a log cabin. The log cabin I thought was the most upsetting, other than the overpass, because when you get there, there's a little girl who's in the log cabin, and she says that Conway was doing something extra weird that she needs to tell the interviewers about. How did that story go for y'all, if you found it?
I don't think I found it.
Okay. There's a little girl named Flora.
I do know, like, she shows up in a few other instances, but I can't remember.
Actually finding her?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's in a cabin, and when you find her, she says, hey, this old man, so he came in, we talked, but then he went in the cabin by himself because he said it reminded him of something. And you can say it from his past or from where something bad happened or from someone he knew. And when he goes inside, she said, and then it was weird because he said he found the basement, but there is no basement. And you can say how he got into the basement. Like, he could either have found a secret entrance in a closet or found an opening in the floor, or he dug through the basement. He dug through the floor into a basement. And Conway will kind of tell this entire story about going into the basement and finding something in there, and then finding water and swimming, and then eventually ending up back on land. But he's completely no worse for wear. And so we kind of get this sequence of maybe Conway's... Yeah. Conway seems to be actively hallucinating.
Jeez.
Or at least that's what the game seems to be implying. But yeah, you then can take an elevator up to the second floor. And the second floor is even wilder than the first floor. Because it's on the roof, it seems like, or an unfinished second floor, because the roof is completely... Like, is it the roof, or is the roof not finished, and there's going to be even more floors? But there are, like, entire houses up there on the second floor.
Like, huge cranes just, like, swinging around in the sky.
Yeah, like a neighborhood. And then every time there's a flash of lightning, there seems to be a giant bird flying with, like, pieces of house in its talons. And you can actually get turned away by people in this section of the neighborhood. Like, it's a cul-de-sac. And so they won't let you in or talk to you. Like, the people on the downstairs were living in kind of the lower status houses. And once you get up to the second floor, it's shops and bougie apartments and suburban houses. And so they won't even talk to you. They won't even let you in. But then you find a little kid who tells you, oh, yeah, the doctor doesn't live here anymore. he lives in the forest. But you can't drive there because there's no road to the forest. You're going to need my brother, this gigantic bald eagle, to take you there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just like I'll call him. Don't worry about it. I got it.
No sweat.
Yeah, so a gigantic. Go ahead, Em.
His name's Julian. Excuse
me. Julian, the giant bald eagle, comes, picks you and Shannon and this little kid up. I think Ezra's the kid.
Yeah.
So you can then pilot this gigantic bird. And did you get the explanation for what the gigantic bird is doing, picking up the houses?
They can't sleep, right? Like they get nightmares in the museum or something?
Yeah. Basically, people can't live in this artificial space. They want to live. They can't sleep in a space that's artificial. So every night, this bird comes, picks up all the houses, drops them off in a forest so they can sleep through the night, and then he drops them back by daybreak.
What the fuck?
Yeah. I mean, as commentary, like, hey, this artificial space we've created does not actually... It exists, but it does not support human life. What they really want to be is in touch with nature.
And the only solution is giant bald eagle. Like, there's no more reasonable one.
Yep. So once you get into the forest is really like one of the most visually striking places because there are multiple lines of trees, and then there's kind of lines of, I don't even know how to describe it. Almost fog. They seem to like cut through the environment. There's like multiple layers of detail and background and foreground that are interplaying constantly. And as you're walking through, you'll see some sections where like the trees are blocking an object, and then as you keep walking, like the object is completely bisected by this mist. And it's unclear if that object even exists. And the more you scroll to the left or right, these objects will spring into existence and then disappear. You're controlling Ezra through this segment as well. And you're mostly talking to Blue as you're traversing the space. And there's a man playing a banjo and an old spiritual as you walk through as well. And you eventually find a doctor. I found the doctor's quotes really upsetting. Here's some of them that I took down. First Ezra had a good quote. My folks had a really nice house, bigger than any of these houses, but it made them worried all the time. Then the bank took it back. And then we had to sleep at the bus station, but I could never get to sleep. So again, we see someone taking out a loan to buy a house or to do a thing, ultimately falling behind on it, and then having their space reclaimed. And once we get to the doctor, he says, I think, and it just comes in medias res, like in the conversation, midway. It says, and yeah, I think during the exit interview is when I realized how badly they had me. But how else can you pay for medical school?
That's a great question.
I have college friends with debts that you can't expect to pay that back unless you're planning to sell painkillers on the side or something. So he continues, getting a scholarship with a pharmaceutical company had a lot of strings attached, but at least I have somewhere to practice, even if I have to follow their market trends a bit. And hey, thanks to all those seminars, I'm an expert on the medical uses of Neuropinol TM.
Mm.
And then to fix Conway's bad leg, he prescribes Neuropinol TM. And the explanation is, I'm going to give you this drug, and then we're going to count back from 5, and then we're going to try and have a normal conversation as the medicine takes effect. And did you could you make out the very first section of his conversation?
I mean, I tried, but it was pretty much just faded beyond at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the text itself starts spinning and fading in and out, but I took down some of it, and it starts, let's talk about billing. The pharmaceutical company I'm contracted with was recently acquired by an electrical company, and so that has changed the billing process. So again, it's layers upon layers of corporations here. We've got a doctor who his entire medical school seems to have been paid through a pharmaceutical company scholarship that makes him basically an indentured servant to the pharmaceutical company. He is specifically required to prescribe their drugs, which is a horrifying concept. But is it that dissimilar from how things currently work? Not sure. Like, I don't know what's more unrealistic, the giant bald eagle or this doctor being in thrall to a pharmaceutical company,
like
just to pay for school.
The parallelism is definitely like deliberate. Like all these situations are equally incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. The kid talking about his parents buying a house with a loan and then losing it makes as much sense as a giant eagle picking houses up to sleep through, so people can sleep through the night in the woods.
Yeah, honestly, like from these people's perspective, like what's the difference between a bald eagle swooping down and picking up the house and some company they've probably never dealt with, never even like heard of, coming in and being like, "Oh, your house is ours now."
Mm.
At least one of them puts you in a forest. The other ones put them in a bus station. Yeah, so that's the end of Chapter 2. You kind of wonk out and go unconscious. So I think that's where we're going to stop, at least in terms of going through. But what are y'all's takes so far on the game?
I'd like to preemptively nominate this for Horror Game of the Year when we get to... and for Sisyphean Torment, that award. I think it's a strong contender for both.
Yeah, I mean, politically, I definitely like it. I like the message it's sending.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the way it sends it. It's all juxtaposition for the most part. It is making the most out of magical realism. Just through these intense juxtapositions of absurd, completely realistic seeming corporate structures. Like, hey, we're going to go to this Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces, and they're going to need you to look at, like, 7 different forms so that they can tell you that this street that got renamed. Like, there's an intense discussion of street renaming policy that comes up. Or, like, this doctor telling you after he's given you the drugs about the billing process, and that now it's going, like, the bill for your treatment's going to be a little weird because his company was bought by an electrical company. But then also... you're driving past a tree that's always on fire. Or you see hermit crabs that live in manila folders. And it's all in the same world. So I think this game, it's got a lot to say, and I'm interested to see how it's going to keep saying it. Any last thoughts before we wrap on chapters 1 and 2?
No, I mean, I think, Gina, you pretty much summed it up. If anybody wants like a good discussion of the connection between, let's say, mysticism and economic realities, Adorno has a good book. It's called The Stars Down to Earth. It's all about why people turn to astrology in times of like economic exploitation and unease and that sort of stuff. So it fits in with some of the things going on here.
Great. So we will look that up. So next up, we'll be covering chapters 3 and 4. I want to save chapter 5 for its own show because that is the only piece that hasn't been out for years.
Sounds good.
So that way, if people don't want spoilers on the stuff that they haven't been able to play for half a decade, at least that will be its own separate episode. And it seems like these chapters are dense. Like, I think there were 3 scenes in Act 2 that I really saw, 3 or 4 scenes, and we have plenty to talk about. So thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to get in touch with the show, again, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. You can also support the show at patreon.com/deeplistens. Thank you, Pete.
Yep. I had a good time on this one. Like Gino said, I'm excited to see where it goes.
Thank you, Em.
I am horrified and interested to see where this is headed, but apprehensive.
Excellent. And thank you, listeners. Till next time. Peace.